NetherRealmIts. Not every day a major artist for one of gaming's premier franchises lets the cat out the bag, but Injustice 2's lead artist going under the name Guy Simon has recently taken to their Instagram once again, the first being to reveal some original color swaps for the final product's various skins. This time, Guy, who describes himself as a nude glamour photographer whose job it is to sculpt and shoot bots, discuss the various more sexy concepts for some of the game's female characters that were then knocked back during production. Mainly under the reasoning that the following designs were too overly skimpy or flesh, revealing they'd have raised the game's rating outside of teen, the most profitable demographic closely associated with superheroes and DC in general. It's always interesting to delve into the development process and see what eventually made it through. Indeed, Injustice 2 has gone on to be one of 2017's best games, with a roster that, yes, leans more heavily into Batman's world than anybody else's, yet still has a phenomenal sense of impact, possibly being NetherRealm's finest work to date. Page 2. NetherRealm. Though she would eventually be released officially after launch, the original version of Starfire was described as being super simple, mainly because the devs had to worry more about ensuring her hair could animate independently of her body. Hilariously, an even earlier version of Starfire went further down a pure Elvish for Hornetines route, as Guy notes that she once had ginormous boobs, which he then reduced because, logically her skimpy bodysuit wouldn't hold them in. Good point. These were thankfully reduced, and Starfire was refined into a more physically intimidating force in the final game, which is just as well, as such older concepts might have seen her as nothing more than a laughingstock. In this post Injustice 2 page 3 NetherRealm, you really have to hand it to Mr. Guy, as being his job as literally a professional bot sculptor, there's a ton of time, pain and effort put into crafting the finest derrieres in all of gaming. In clearly an ass man, says Guy here, whose initial vision for Black Canary was less tough biker chick and more predicated on giving us more booty. NetherRealm. As such, Canary's original character model was far more petite and curvy, accentuating her backside in a way that sadly, thankfully, DC thought was a little much. Ultimately, they requested a design that was far less tight costume-wise and more self-assured, much to Simon's chagrin, who noted apparently booty is a scary thing in video games. Some execs clearly didn't take note of just how about-focused Overwatch's initial wave of fandom was. In this post Injustice 2 page 4 NetherRealm. Another fan favorite, the earliest models for Catwoman were mainly put in place so the coders could test various pieces of material and see how they react under different light conditions. This all takes place for weeks and months before the likes of DC or NetherRealm's higher-ups get a look at what could ship as a final version, letting designs like a far more cleavage-heavy Catwoman get through, before then being toned down. As you all know from what shipped, the final version of Catwoman is far more conservative in her aesthetic, though with such a huge array of loot on offer, you can still create a skimpier look with relative ease. In this post Injustice 2 page 5 NetherRealm. Originally looking to channel the borderline naked Ivy from Arkham Knight, Guy and his team designed a version of Pamela that was based on Victoria's Secret models, her overall stature meaning to be tall and elegant looking. Interestingly, Simon states that across the board, many of the game's characters were overhauled or changed in lots of key ways to reflect a more mature stance on sexuality. This mainly boiled down to breast reduction across the board, but Ivy was then changed into being a curvy one after a redesign of Catwoman removed this label from her model. In this post Injustice 2 page 6 NetherRealm can't be the only one laughing at the hilarity of including a biker's helmet alongside a costume that otherwise looks like something Judas Priest would throw out in the 70s. Still, Simon notes that at one time Black Canary had some risque attire, according to some, essentially trying to give her something of a unique visual identity on the roster. The team thought she just looked like some biker chick in bondage gear. Guy admits he was a fan of this direction, but was outnumbered in votes when it came to keeping it. Interestingly, some of this bondage gear still remains on the character, albeit buried under various other layers of clothing. In this post Injustice 2